your Life Unfiltered podcast with your hosts, Kitu Bafari and Deepam Jain. In this podcast, we dig deep into the life experiences of our guests to connect the dots between their early experiences and what they're doing today. Today, we have a very special guest, Falguni Lakhani Adams. Falgi, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Falguni Lakhani Adams. I currently live in Los Angeles, California, and I'm an executive producer with Vice TV.
Fantastic.
And a mom of two.
Great to have you, Falguni. And before we talk about what you're doing today and your various adventures that you're pursuing, we'd love to go back a few years to your early childhood, early upbringing, and would love to learn more about how your experience growing up in USA was like. And it would be great if you could try to connect with some of those experiences with what you're doing today. We really want to dig deep into figuring out some of the early motivations and inspirations that kind of shaped you into the person that you are today.
Yeah, sure. I was born in India, but it was more because my parents wanted to bring me back there to, be born around my grandmother. And then I stayed with my grandma for a while, and then I moved to New York when I was about 3. And I have a huge family in New York, and I'm assuming you're Jane, so I'm Jane as well. And so, my father was very much involved in the early stages of starting the Jain Temple in New York. And so I saw the value of community and community building at a very young age. And so, I would say, like, reflecting back, that was definitely a through line for me in every choice I've made in my life. I just didn't know it, right? So obviously I have a bird's eye view now, and I have like 20/20 vision, but my parents, they're strict, and my brothers are doctors, they married doctors. And so when I went to college, they said, listen, we want you to pick one of these 4 careers because it's important. And it was a lawyer, doctor, engineer, dentist. And to me, being a lawyer felt the closest, I guess, to a creative, endeavor, because I always sort of had that creative spark to me. And I also didn't want to be like my brothers. You know how that goes. It's like my brothers are older, and I was like, I don't want to be a doctor like the two of you. They're both ophthalmologists. I'm going to do something completely different. And so I went to school in New York. I went to Columbia University, and I tried to go down that path. And a lot of the courses I took, Columbia was a special school in that I got to really lean into South Asian courses, about human rights issues in India and in Pakistan, and just all the political science courses. And I wrote a lot of papers around that. So I worked at the UN. I worked for an immigration law firm. So it was always my goal in my head, like, okay, if I'm going to practice law, I want to give back to my community. I wanted to do something that would help, shape laws. And this is before Amal Clooney. So I had a very glamorized view of what an international lawyer, human rights lawyer, was going to be. And then I think when I graduated law school and I was trying to find that job, I realized that job actually doesn't exist. I had to be like, it was all business, and that's never sort of been my forte, even though I am Gujarati. So I became a prosecutor. I definitely tried to practice law for a while, and I realized that for me, my strongest tool in sort of doing what I wanted to do was through storytelling. And so I made a pivot to try and get a job in journalism. And so my first job was at MSNBC as a production assistant at 20. I don't know. I had already worked, so I was the oldest person in our little production assistant pod. I was like, in my blue Navy suit from my court days, giving scripts to people, like printing scripts and running around. And but it was cool. I wanted to learn. I didn't want to just fall into it. I wanted to know what I was getting into.
Okay, fantastic.
That was a long answer. Sorry.
It's all good. So here's a question. Let's lean into the lawyer side first, and then we'll go into the media side.
Sure.
But for the lawyer side, when you're in that space, what's some of the challenges that you faced in the legal profession?
That's a very good question, because at that time we're talking about the late 90s, and being a woman, being an attorney, I wasn't taken seriously. And I'm sure, like I said, in reflecting back, I'm not a person who gives up easily. And I definitely resigned myself, and I actually often reflect on this and wonder that if I were older or if it was a different time, would I have given law more of a chance? Because obviously there is value in being a lawyer, and like you have power to make changes. I always wonder that because I went straight from law school to practicing law, and honestly, nobody. I don't feel like judges took me. Everybody thought I was a paralegal. They always thought I was so young. I was a woman. Like, even my male counterparts, they didn't quite like. They were like, "We'll take the lead," because they partner you up at the DA's office, and so it was a very different time. It was a very different culture, and if you looked young, or if you were attractive, or if you any of those things, it was sort of like you were put in a bucket.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So it's kind of you were boxed and you had to find a way to get out of that box.
Correct. Yeah. And believe in myself, right? Because at a certain point, when you're still trying to discover who you are, and when you're trying to navigate a very it's a man's world, especially back then, it was complicated. I think it's interesting to see where we are now. When you think about that compared to what we were doing then, um, there were so many people would be canceled, right? Like all of the people I worked with would be canceled today. Like there's no question. My last day when I left the DA's office, when I told him I was leaving, um, the assistant DA at the time, he was like the number two, bumped in. He didn't know me, and he bumped into me and in the lobby, and he was like, "Oh, where do you work?" "I work here." And I was like, I used to work here too." And I realized it was like the way he was talking to me. He's like, "Oh, do you want to have a drink in my office?" Like that was the culture. People just drank in their offices and everybody hung out. But, we accepted a lot of it because we didn't know any better. We didn't have anyone saying, "Hey, Falguni, it's okay. Like, you don't need to like be nice, and you don't need to do that. You're going to be okay." I didn't have that. So, yeah, it was a hard time to try to really move around in any of these spaces, especially as a woman of color, so.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like, now this through the opposite side of the spectrum, what were some of the really good positives of being in the legal profession?
Oh, I actually loved being a prosecutor. I was hired by the Brooklyn DA from a class. Like I went to St. John's Law School, and I specifically went there too because I had heard that the DA taught a class on the weekends. And so, like I said, I knew what I wanted. So at least I thought I did. So my path was very clear. I was like, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to go. I want Charlie Hines to hire me from the class. He's going to see how great I am. He's going to hire, and by the way, all of that happened. I was
Oh,
very
wow.
lucky. But that's when you come to learn, like, you think you want something, right? I didn't know. I just thought that seemed like the right thing. And then when it happened, I was like, is this really like exactly what I wanted, right? It wasn't, obviously, but yeah, he taught a class, a mock trial class, and it was actually very exciting and exhilarating to get up there and plead someone's case and like really fight and advocate for someone. It's amazing to have that platform to do that. There's
Right.
there's nothing more satisfying, I think.
Fascinating to hear, the kind of training you've gone through and kind of the environment that you used to work in. I was just wondering, as you were, you're working in the DA's office. I'm sure there are a series of triggers that you probably went through, which eventually led you to pivot into a different career. I was just wondering if reflecting now, what are some of those triggers
Um,
that really, in
yeah,
hindsight?
that's a really astute question because absolutely there were I did not just sort of one day say I don't feel like doing this, right? Like something,
Hmm.
I had loans. I mean, I did I had to tell my parents, like, "Mommy, Papa, guess what? I'm not going to practice law anymore." Like that was a very complicated, to this day still, moment for me in my life. But um
Hmm.
I because I was very clear about what I wanted to do, like what my end game was, I found that the judicial system, especially at that point in my career, and this is what I mean by I sometimes wonder if I had stuck it out, if my outcome would have been different. But at that point in my career, I knew I wanted to work with domestic violence victims. I knew I wanted to. It's like I almost immediately wanted to see the change that I could do, like put on this earth, and like that is really not realistic for a 25-year-old woman, right? But that was my goal, and so they again, I got the things I wanted, meaning I said, hey, I want to work in the domestic violence bureau of the DA's
Mm-hmm.
office, which is very, like, I didn't know this, but it's a very, very, very hard place to work, because you get these very sad cases. And I would say at that time, especially, I don't know what the statistics are now, but 7 times out of 10, the victims don't come forward. And so I never felt like I was doing anything. It was like I was spinning, and most of my cases were also like first time marijuana use, or, and I was like, why are we putting people in jail for things that are social issues? So there was like a confluence of, this isn't what my value system wasn't aligning with what I was
Mm-hmm.
doing. And I wasn't happy, and I will say I'm proud of myself when I think back or look back that I didn't stick it out for longer,
Mm-hmm.
because in that sense, like I wasn't happy at that moment. And so I was like, I got to try other things. But I did try, to do corporate. I was like, maybe I'll do corporate law. And I tried that. And that was horrendous for me. I was like, this is not where I didn't have this spark, like you go into something and you're like, I have this drive and this is what I want to do. And then when you land in it and you're just not doing the thing you thought you were going to do, that's what happened. But
I see.
Okay. So like the disillusionment is kind of what you're describing. So it's like as you got more and more into it, you're like, is this really what I want? And then you decided it's not, and then you became a
yeah.
little bit disengaged and essentially eventually decided to change career paths.
You know what else? And this is a silly thing to say, but it's the truth. And I actually never quite pieced it together until you guys are asking me this. But at the time that I was working in law, there were a series of sort of TV shows around lawyers. Really, like the legal shows were taking they had front and center stage, and so it was like
Ah,
Ally
Mm-hmm.
McBeal, Law and Order. All of these shows were huge. There was a glamorization of this field, and like that's actually, it was fun, right? I was young and my teammates were fun and everything, but we weren't doing God's work. You know what I mean? We were like, oh, you have first time marijuana use, slap on the wrist, or if you do it again, we're going to have a trial. Like it was, I just remember at the time thinking, this is kind of silly. Like, what are we doing here? Dana, like we're acting like we're so powerful, but really we're toying with people's lives. And I think that was my disconnect, of like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not helping my community. I'm just flexing some weird power because I was fortunate enough to go to law school and I was fortunate enough to land here. That's sort of how I felt. And that didn't sit well with me. My intuition was like,
I see.
no, Falguni, this is not who you are.
okay. So
Got it.
here's a question then. The learnings that you got from working in the legal profession, have you found it to help you out in the creative spaces, especially, in the media spaces, or
Yeah.
have you found it to be a completely different skill set?
Oh no. Well, I it actually helped. It was huge. It was huge for me because it definitely catapulted my career in the early stages, because I got sort of that crap job, the grunt work job at MSNBC, and that was around 2001, a couple of months before 9/11. And like I said, I was the oldest person in my pod, and I would, print scripts and hand them to the host, or I would stack tapes. I mean, I did the most mundane tasks you could imagine. But 2 months into my job, 9/11 happened. And it was at that point, because I had been in an environment as an attorney where I was in front of a judge arguing cases. Now, here I was in the biggest, most horrific moment in our US history. And I was like the grown up in this situation. We were in the control room and I could handle, I was like calm under pressure, handling it. People were going crazy. I mean, it was a horrible, horrible event. And so I think that definitely helped me. And then it sort of continued to, because I worked for a legal correspondent, Dan Abrams. At the time, I was his producer. Like, they immediately paired us up together because of my legal background, and he's a lawyer. And so we did all the like hijackers. We did all the legal cases around it, and then
Oh, wow.
after that, I covered some of the biggest legal cases like Michael Jackson and Scott Peterson and like all of these big cases. Like, we traveled, and Kobe Bryant,
Hmm.
we'd like covered all those stories. So my legal background allowed other attorneys in these cases actually to trust me, because they knew that I could dissect the information and digest it in a way that wasn't surface level, that I could really get to the core of what the case was about, because nothing is black and white.
Okay,
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so even the
Hmm.
terminologies, right? As you find out more about the information of the cases, you can understand the legal terminology much better than someone else that's covering the same topic. So,
And it's trust, because your sources,
Hmm.
like, for something like Michael Jackson is a very good example. That was a highly competitive story for the media, right? I mean, I worked at NBC at the time, and like ABC, like we were all in like heat, like dead heat competition to get the big interviews. Everybody wanted Michael Jackson. And I ended up befriending his Michael Jackson's attorney, and a big part of it is that he trusted me because I knew how to speak to him sort of lawyer to lawyer. I was like, listen,
uh,
I understand. I understand that a lot of people think your client did it, but I am willing to sit in court and listen to the trial, and I can dissect that trial because I worked as a prosecutor, you know? And so we developed this really it took a while because he didn't trust anybody. And so then when Michael Jackson was acquitted, it was like a huge deal for NBC, because now we got the first interview with his lawyer after that trust was built.
Wow. That's absolutely amazing, Falguni. Yeah. You really basically took all the learnings and just kind of combined it with your kind of pivoted career choice that you made afterwards and just really took it to the next level. So that's amazing. And I just wanted to acknowledge one more thing. I'm sure, in hindsight, it's easy to kind of think that, oh, I took this decision and all of these things happened. But I'm sure in the moment it was a very brave decision because you didn't really know what you were getting into until you actually made the switch. And talking to your Indian parents about career pivots, I think it's just the most terrific thing to do. So
Yeah.
kudos to you on being
Thank
able
you.
to
I
do
appreciate
that.
that. It was, listen, I was like, my parents wanted me to get married. They're like, wait, what? Now you want to change careers? We don't even want you to work. Just get married, So I was like, I just remember I was in law school. They were trying to arrange my marriage. I was dating somebody. I was everything that they didn't want me to be, right? At that moment. But, at the end of the day, you have to follow, I don't know, like I like to tell people, like, now, especially young women, like, you just have to quiet your mind enough to like really listen to that like drumbeat of your soul. And I think that I probably did, right? Because you're right, like I did not want to disappoint my parents, and nobody wants to. They
Mhm.
really understand what I did. I mean, when I started working at Dateline, which was like a very big deal, which they will never know really to this day, when I got that job and I wrote my first hour and it was airing on prime time, and I was like, Mom, Dad, like, you have to watch my show. I wrote the whole episode and they watched it. And my dad calls me. He's like, Beta, I didn't see you on TV. I thought you said you were going to be on TV. And I was like, Papa, you don't want me on Dateline. That means somebody has killed me or I have killed somebody. Like, that's not where you want to see me on TV. Like, he just didn't get it. I was like, did you see my name? My name was like the first thing. It's a produced by. And he was like, oh no, I missed, you like totally missed that. So they didn't really understand. I think the only moment that they really had a lot of excitement and pride, and it was an unexpected moment, was when I was covering the Michael Jackson trial by accident. Really, just like a sheer accident, I ended up on TV
Oh,
because
wow.
Mm-hmm.
I was jumping. We had, like I said, it was so competitive. And I don't know if you guys remember this image of Michael Jackson dancing on the roof of his car, but that was like that moment. It was his arraignment, and everybody had to run out really fast to try to be first because the news cycles were such that like MSNBC, CNN, Fox, it was like a 24-hour like pit that you had to keep like feeding this beast, and so I had just landed. I was living in New York at the time, and I just landed the night before, and I was like running in my heels to try to get us first. And the correspondent for NBC actually didn't really know who I was because I wasn't working with him. So he just gave me the mic, and he's like, "Tell us what happened." And so then I was on TV telling everybody what happened, and I guess like my relatives saw me, and they like called my parents. They're like, "Oh my God, she was on TV!" And of course, my mom was like, "Why did you wear that necklace?" And I was like, "Mom, I didn't know I was going to be on TV." It was a big comment. She's like, "Who told you to wear the necklace you were wearing?" And I'm like, "Oh, brother." But that was cool for them because then after that, MSNBC for that whole day kept putting me on TV. And so I was like their analyst talking about the case. And then my correspondent had me cover other cases and, had me on camera. That wasn't my jam, but I did it, and it was that's when they could relate. Otherwise, they were like, I don't get what you do. They still don't know what I do.
Right,
So, do
right.
you get a chance to interact with like Michael Jackson one on one or take pic? Oh,
Yeah,
that's amazing.
I went to his ranch. I went to Neverland Ranch. We like snuck in. Well, we were invited, but we snuck in our camera, and we would hang out with like all the Jacks, like Randy Jackson, especially because he was very close to Michael Jackson's attorney. And so they would invite us to like church or like different things. And so, yeah, it's one day I'm going to write a whole thing about sort of the media industry from that time because there was a lot going on that doesn't go on today with the advent of like digital and everything. We didn't have all of that then. So it's like everything was on MSNBC and you wanted everything first. And so Katie Couric had to have that first interview, and we were all fighting to get our person to, I was trying to get Katie Couric that interview, and then she got it, and then everybody was writing about it, and it was like, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I can imagine. Completely different world.
different world.
One thing I'm actually very curious about is, can you like describe like Michael Jackson since you had like first-hand experience of interacting with him? What's he like? Is it very different from what's like shown on television or other interviews?
Um, the thing that I felt around him, and actually even just being at Neverland Ranch, I felt sad for him. He seemed like a sad person, right? Like a
Oh, okay.
lonely, sad person. I think that's why he surrounded himself with kids. He was a child. He talked like a child. He acted like a child. His sensibilities were a little childlike. And, he probably was quite eccentric because he would hear music in his head so much, right? So I'm sure that when you are sometimes that gifted or that talented, I think that you probably can't relate to like most people. And so I will say, Neverland Ranch was very creepy to me. I was just like, this is strange. It was a playground. It had like everything a child would love. But I'm like, why does a grown man have everything a child would love? Like, that part definitely was a little weird to me. I was like, I don't understand this. But he was cool. His family was cool. But I always think to myself, like, how do these people feel like someone always wants something from you? People were
Hmm.
around him. He had like Reverend Jesse Jackson around him. Like we would be with all of these people, and you would see there were so many handlers, so many people around him, and everybody is sort of playing interference. Jermaine Jackson was always there, and it's like everybody wants a piece of that, fame and action. Like you
I
could feel that. Yeah.
I can totally understand that. It seems like it's almost like you're tortured by your own success because you don't know if people are there because they really like you as a person or if they're there to get their own piece of the action.
And you imagine someone who's had that much plastic surgery has such a deep insecurity, and so if you're already an insecure person, and then you don't even know if someone is being nice to you because they want a piece of this action or they like you, like he will never know. He never knew. You know, I will say his lawyer is definitely one of the nicest lawyers I'd ever like worked with, because I covering a lot of celebrity trials, I've encountered a lot of attorneys, and some of them are like the same old, but he was a nice guy, and he really was trying to be compassionate with Michael, you know. So yeah, it's a wild ride when I look back, right? Like
Yeah.
my kids, like I found some photos and they're like, "Mom, is that Michael Jackson?" I was like, "Actually, yes, this is a picture of Michael Jackson with his umbrella and I'm standing there, you know." And they're like, "That's crazy." And I was like, "Yeah, I haven't thought about it, but it is crazy." His
Yeah.
bodyguard used to text me, right? Because I was trying to get the interviews. They'd be like, "Can Michael meet today?" And his bodyguard's like, "We'll see." And wild times. It's not the same these days. You know,
That's
journalism is the same. You don't have to work your sources like you did then. I had to work
right.
all these sources. I had to like build trust, right? It's just not, there's more immediacy now in storytelling.
Yeah. I guess
Absolutely.
going off of that, what other famous or like exciting celebrities or just, just famous trials or
Yeah.
personas that you were able to secure through while you were working at MSNBC?
Oh, we got uh, we covered the Kobe Bryant. This is not going to be popular, but we covered the Kobe Bryant trial. That was one of the first. So to give you context, I worked with Dan Abrams, who was in MSNBC's, and he had his own show. He developed his own show called the Abrams Report, and I was essentially his showrunner. So we would travel all over the country, and this is I was still living in New York, and so we did Kobe Bryant, we did Scott Peterson, which was a big Bay Area trial, actually. Deepam, I don't know if you were living there then, but it was huge. And then, you know, I say like in terms of big, trials like that, Michael Jackson was the biggest, but then through just working at Dateline and everything else, like I've had to interview like Rob Lowe and, you know, a lot of other celebrities, but for side Dateline shows
Got it.
Got it.
when I was
Got it.
there. And then I worked, then I worked for a year and a half for Chris Matthews, and he had a show called Hardball. And so we would go around the country. I would travel with him, and we would go to colleges, and he would interview a big politician. So John Kerry, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, and we would go to colleges, and we would try to get college kids involved in politics. And so they would be our audience members. And so I basically produced those. Like I wrote questions for him for these guests. So I got to meet like every single presidential candidate or president, it feels like, or like Rudy Giuliani and Hillary Clinton, like I said, Joe Biden, John
Mitt
Kerry,
Romney.
Mitt Romney, yes. Mitt Romney, I got to meet Arnold Schwarzenegger. That was
Oh,
a
wow.
so we basically like went to we went to Chapman University with him, and we went to the Naval Academy with John Kerry. So it was very cool to sort of talk to some of these politicians in that vein, and also get young students and young people involved in politics, because I don't know about you guys, but like in my house we didn't really focus on politics, right? Like South Asians, especially back then, like our parents' generation, they didn't even understand or know how to really engage in politics, except that maybe they were Democrat. Maybe, right? Like my mom, I remember like Jimmy Carter, and I was like, okay, but that's all I know. And so this was a good opportunity to get young people involved in political issues and like learn more about stuff, because this matters. And so I feel like a show that was ahead of its curve. It was cool, and I wish there was another show like that today, because I
Hmm.
think it's important.
Yeah,
And plus,
absolutely.
Joe Biden, and had a long conversation with him. But I have all these pictures too. That's what my child is like. you have a picture with Joe Biden? You have a picture? And I do. We talked about, I was a prosecutor. We talked about the fact that we were both prosecutors,
Oh, wow. Yeah. Awesome. Wow, what a fascinating. I wish, I mean, it sounds like all those, you've had great adventures as you were like going through all these interviews and talking to these people and so on. I guess you eventually made a move to LA as well. So talk to us a little bit more about that. Like what drove that particular move and where did you end up in LA?
So that is, I met my now husband at MSNBC. He was hired when Operation Iraqi Freedom, they were ramping up for that in New York, so around 2003, and so they had to hire overnight writers, and he works in the business as well. And so we met at work, and then he's from LA, and he moved back. But then, like I mentioned, my job started bringing me to LA all the time, and so it was one of those things where I just honestly, I was covering Michael Jackson. I remember this, and I told NBC, I was like, listen, I have to see if this relationship is going to work. So I'm giving you notice. I'm quitting this job. Like, again, this is one of my, like, when I look back, I'm like, if my kid did that, I would probably kill her. Like, what? Leaving a really good job, and you're like, I'm leaving to see if this is going to work. But I got lucky, and they wanted to keep me, and they knew I had a lot of sources, especially for that big trial. And so they found me a job at Dateline. And so I got a job at Dateline out here in LA, and worked in that job for like 11 years, and then eventually married my boyfriend, and, have been here since. 2 kids later and multiple jobs later. And
Awesome. And talk to us a little bit more about what you're up to right now. We know that you're working at Vice Media, and to the extent you want to share with our audience, I think that'd be great.
Sure. It's funny, my life has come full circle. So one of the big projects I worked on in 2021 was a 2-hour documentary on 9/11. It was comedy around
Oh,
9/11.
wow.
So I was like, wow, I remember working on all of these things, and it came full circle, and we did that documentary. But I basically am an executive, so I oversee a slate of different shows. Like right now, I have about 7 shows I'm overseeing, and Dark Side of Comedy. A lot of docuseries and documentaries is what I. So it's an intersection. It's not straight up journalism. It's more sort of like the Michael Moore of journalism, which is fun. And so I oversee. I write. Most Expensivest was one of the shows I did. So like I worked with 2 Chains.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, he was cool. I worked with Michael. I was working on Michael K. Williams' show before he passed. He passed away while filming our show. Right now we're doing episodes on Joan Rivers and like a lot of these comedians, and so we're interviewing a lot of comedians to talk about them. And then I have another show called 9 Lives, which is
Hmm.
great. It's about people, like Paris Hilton or Janet Jackson, and sort of their fall and then their rise, and their fall and their rise. So Vice does a lot of dark and light. We don't do, our stories aren't very direct, like, oh, we're just going to do a true Hollywood story. It's more like, let's look at the nuances of people's stories, and let's look at the layers, and let's peel back the onion.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Okay.
yeah, these are very intricate, cool, also nostalgia facing shows. And then I have another show called working title. I think we're going to end up calling it The Mission, but I don't know, or something like that. And that's a crime show. It's a very cool crime show. It's about people who were held hostage and sort of live to tell the tale, and you
Wow.
hear stories through their lens. So yeah, it's a big
Hmm.
range.
That's
I oversee.
amazing.
It's really fun.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And you also you run your own nonprofit on the side, right? Which is, I mean, it's called Getting Hotter. So
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, sure. I realize that like the sun is shining on me now in LA. So basically, It's not a nonprofit in that we're not registered as a nonprofit, but it's a community basing group that supports South Asian women particularly, but all women in all phases of menopause. And we realize that most health related things that women experience, we don't talk about it. It's all taboo, and so we have an enterprise coming up around this, and we're excited. We're going to announce it probably in October, but we're working with some really big names, and we're going to create a big platform. And it's going to be bigger than menopause. It's going to actually focus on aging in general and
Hmm.
what that is, midlife for women, and how like our life isn't over, right? And like we all have to stop like putting a sort of a number on it and just like living it, and what that is. It's what I was saying to you guys in the beginning, where sometimes when I tell people how old I'm turning, they're like, "You look so great for your age," and I'm like, "Can you just say I look great? Like, stop qualifying." Decided, right? Like, who decided what I was supposed to look like at my age? So it's that same idea. But for me and my partner Kruti, who when we started getting hotter, our thing was we didn't want this issue to be like all the other issues where certain communities are marginalized in the conversation, because it's not a one size fits all. So that was a big impetus for us.
Got it. Wow. All right. No, thanks for sharing that, and all the best with that particular venture.
Thank you.
We would definitely publicize it to our listeners, but also we can also do some marketing for you there.
Oh, that'd be awesome. I think that when the time comes to, it will be, it's a big white space of most women in my age group, or who are experiencing this in their lives. They are all sort of CEOs or big vice presidents in their realm, in their field, and so it's a very big money making space, which is fascinating. So I think that's our other thing, where like we don't want this to become a thing where other groups profit and we're not in the game, as
Hmm.
like for South Asians and for Asians. So it'll be interesting to see where it lands. But a lot of VCs are like very much interested in this space because,
Very nice.
yeah.
So, one thing I was actually curious about is, since you're in the process of having 7 different TV shows going live, right?
Yeah.
How does that process of selecting a TV show happen? So, it's like if someone wanted to have a TV show made, can they submit an idea, or like what does that process look like?
Oh yeah, it's a complicated. So I work on documentaries and docuseries, right? When it comes to scripted series, for example, all of that mostly goes through agents. We do have agents who pitch things to us, and then we internally at Vice, we're more collaborative. We have meetings, and in our meetings, we go through everything. We have like a whole development team, and we're like, do we like this? Do we not like this? How do we feel? But also, we're buyers and sellers. So I like go out and sell some of the shows that I have made, or that I have created, or that I oversee, or that I write. So it's a really cool sort of creative process for us, because I almost always feel like I have the ability to shape a story or to send a story out. And then,
Interesting.
on the side, I will say, just in terms of like through line in my jobs in general, or my goals, my husband works for the Today Show, and especially lately, I find that I am taking a lot of the different things that are happening within our community and trying to find places where I can help elevate brands or people or stories from our community. So this is like my big ultimate goal, right? Is to like bring diversity and diverse voices into all aspects of entertainment and media, because that's what's lacking. And if it's there, it's the same all the time. So that's sort of my bigger picture goal. And to get the sun out of my face, although I look very angelic.
Yeah, it looks like you're glowing.
I'm
It's a good thing.
blessed, being blessed. Yeah.
Sun shining. Yeah, that's been the theme.
Right? Exactly.
Yep.
Why not?
All right. Ketal, do you have any other questions? Otherwise, we can move on to the next segment of our discussion over here.
I think I'm good for the moment. So the next section is going to be a rapid fire round. Deepam will walk you through it.
Yeah, so yeah, Falguni, it's called rapid fire, as the name suggests. First thing that comes to mind, I'll
Mhm.
start with an easy one, tea or coffee.
Coffee, easy.
All right.
No,
Chances are be
what'd you say?
no, sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, my kids often say that they think mommy will die if she doesn't get her coffee. That's how easy that answer was. I really tell people that. My mom will die if she doesn't get her coffee.
Wow.
It's true.
All right.
Yeah,
Mountains or beaches?
beaches,
All right. Morning person or night owl?
night owl.
Okay.
Unless I get my coffee, then I can be a morning person.
Yeah, again, what's it called, a
Coffee
combined
dependent.
package. Me
Coffee
both.
Yeah,
dependent. Yeah, coffee dependent.
yeah. What's your favorite comfort food?
You know, Indian food all the way. Like every time I go on vacation and I come back, I need like I'm vegetarian, but like I need my vegetarian like palak paneer or like paneer makhani. I like just yum. And whereas everybody else in LA is like tacos, tacos, and I'm like no palak paneer. Where's my yeah? So old school
I
that
hear
way.
you.
You know
I'm
what I
with
mean? I
you on
need
that.
Italian food or I should say or fresh pasta with like tomato sauce and cheese. Nothing beats that either.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
That makes
I love
sense.
those carby foods. Well, I guess part of it is growing up on the East Coast. There's a lot of carby foods, but I love
Right?
carby.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
All right. Um, what's your favorite virtue in others?
Loyalty.
Okay.
I think it's underrated. I actually also feel like in our society right now, I clearly have strong opinions about this, but I feel like in our society right now, even like being in a relationship and staying in a relationship and sticking with it is undervalued. Like nobody values. I mean, I've been with my husband now. We've been together for 20 years, and I sit there and I'm like, it's actually we should feel proud like that. This is equally impressive as our careers, honestly, because all of these things take work and effort. So that's why I feel like loyalty is super underrated in our
Hun-
society.
100%.
I 100% agree with that.
Okay. I guess the next one. What's your secret superpower?
My secret superpower, I can find things.
Oh, that's an interesting one. We've never heard that one
Yeah,
before.
I've
So,
never heard
like,
of
you
that.
remember where everything's like located in your house, or like, what do you mean by that?
And sometimes it's an intuitive thing. So, like, if you're like, Falguni, I haven't been able to find this book, and I'm talking to you, and can be like, well, have you checked here? And like, I would say not. I feel confident that 9 times out of 10, you will find it in this place that I am suggesting.
Oh,
You know,
wow.
like, move
No.
to my
So you're
house.
resourceful in that
Yeah,
sense.
and it like, yeah, I guess I'm resourceful, and but it's an important skill because people lose
It's a,
crap all the time in that house.
Actually, one thing I always suggest when people have lost stuff is you check the trash can because sometimes people accidentally throw in the garbage and they don't think about that one.
Yeah, well, it's almost like this detective game, right? It's like, okay, where were you, and I'll just slowly ask these questions, and then I'll be like, have you checked here? And I like to do it casually because then that like surprise of like, oh yeah, here it is, or oh yeah, my glasses were on my head all the time, or whatever, like, it's just fun. I would say that, and I am like a master puzzle, Scrabble, like all of that. I'm obsessed. I could spend hours, and it's like something no it's a thing that people it makes me happy. Actually, no one would expect it. They're always like they underestimate that about me, but I'll kick your butt.
So
Yeah.
that's actually an interesting point, and I wonder if it's somehow connected to your legal background, right? Because when it comes to law, is a huge component is problem solving, and the other component is detail orientation.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
if I think about it, if you combine that with what you just mentioned about being able to find things, I guess it has to do with detail oriented. You know that these are common ways that people make mistakes and misplace things, so you come to that conclusion. And then
Yeah.
with puzzles is problem solving. So I wonder if there's some kind of parallel
Well,
there,
I'm
or
sure, because when you take the bar exam, um, there are three parts in this. The part that I would always like rock out on was like logical reasoning. Whereas like that was the section that people hated. You know, they were like, oh God, because you always had to like piece it together and it was like a pattern. And, you know, I like patterns. Like right now, even like the New York Times has a new game, Connections. Have you guys played it yet? It's amazing.
I
Oh
don't
my
think
God,
so.
it's like the new Wordle to me. It's so good. And it's patterns. It's like looking at all these words and then putting them and checking out the patterns. I like seeing patterns. And like, that's all, you know, and I feel like this latter part of my life, I have really stepped into it where I'm like, I've been on game shows. Like last year, I was like on NPR and I was, you know, I was on Leah Remini's show. Like I've just started to do the things that I like to do because I'm like, why not? I'm not going to keep it secret anymore. I am a nerd when it comes to puzzles. Yeah.
That's actually so pattern recognition is an amazing skill set, right? Because there's two different levels of that, right? First is identifying the patterns, then is utilizing the patterns, and then it's creating the patterns. So
Mm.
just being skilled at recognizing patterns, huge benefit, I think, in all aspects of life, honestly.
I've never looked at it that way, but I will. I have been wondering, Getu, like why I love this game so much. Like I wait for it. I have to wait 24 hours, and I'm like, when is Connections like refreshing? You'd think that I wouldn't have time to like keep refreshing it because I am a little. But no, I just it's yeah, it's cool. It's fun for me.
I'm
Awesome.
going to take a little bit of a tangent because I'm curious about this though. But since it seems you're really good at pattern recognition, do you see any patterns happening now that you can extrapolate to the future, or like what are some of the patterns you think that are currently happening and what you believe may happen?
I think that we are all everybody is running scared right now. I'm going to talk about the entertainment industry for a minute, but
Okay.
I feel like everyone's running scared right now, you know, and the strikes and the this and the that, and no one wants to spend money and everyone's scared. And I have seen this pattern before. I have lived through this pattern. Every time these would happen, I would have to write like double datelines because, you know, we don't get residuals, we don't get anything. We have to do it. It aired on prime time. So my prediction, and so maybe it's like I do the pattern recognition, but I also, you know, because we're Indian, right? And we like have gone to see how many psychics, and like I can read tarot and do all of that also. And I predict that in about 6 months, um, there is going to be an influx of jobs for everybody. Like there's just going to be, people are going to need to hire because we're going to need to create more. So that's like one thing. And I think everyone's super scared of AI, but I actually don't think that's going to take the kind of stronghold that we think it is. I'm not saying it's not going to, but I don't think it's going to be what we think it's going to be. That's definitely a pattern I see. And then the other pattern I feel like is that we're in a time right now where we're all leaning into nostalgia big time. When you look at
Oh
like,
yes,
Hmm.
right,
absolutely.
Yep.
the When documentary, like all these documentaries that are coming out. And as much as we're sort of really delving into technology, I do believe that there is going to be such a trend, and it's going to be a huge trend of like completely not doing any of it and going back to those days where we would all sit around in circles and play cards with our families. Like that, the pandemic was priming us for that, and now it's going to like go into full force in, I would say, in about a year or 2 years.
I completely see that, and I'm going to make another parallel based on what you said.
Yeah.
I think right now many movie studios are
Mm-hmm.
capitalizing on nostalgia. So a good
Mm-hmm.
example could be we just had the Barbie movie come out. We had the Mario movie, the Super Mario movie. I
The
Mm-hmm.
mean,
Barbie.
the remake of
Oh yeah.
Spider-Man.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So everything that's like a lot of the big major movies that are coming out, it's
Hmm.
playing on nostalgia from the 80s and the 90s, the early
Oh,
2000s.
totally. Listen, that's this Vice right now. All of our shows, we have Dark Side of '90s, Dark Side of 2000s. You know, even Nine Lives. Like we're gonna re-explore Paris Hilton. Like, and I remember I actually covered some of that stuff way back when, like when all of the Joe Francis, Girls Gone Wild, all the sex. Like I have knowledge of that, so it's always really interesting to me where I'm like, okay, now you're asking me to take so much of that knowledge and look at it through a new lens. And by the way, it's what fashion does. Fashion has
Yeah,
been doing this for
Right.
centuries, right?
that's really
Hmm.
good.
That's
So
very true.
I think it's the same, but it's going to be heavier. It's going to be more heavy-handed in the sense that we as a society are going to really, really scale back and crave, like we are craving that human interaction and contact. And like, that's why they have to come up with all these fake, like, hugging circles because people haven't been touched in a while and because everyone's on their technology. And I think that there's going to be this like a huge surge in like stuff being created so that people can actually figure out how to connect again, when it's going to be as basic as what we all have done, how we grew up, right? How did we grow up? We played cards with our relatives at every occasion, right? Every single card game, like that's what's going to come back.
Drive-in movie theaters.
What'd
I
you say?
feel like at some point that's going to come back. It'll be a novelty, but drive-in movie theaters.
Oh yeah, they're starting it in LA already.
Oh, they are?
They're bringing that back. That's what, and also that's what like some of these rooftop movies. That's what all of that is about, so that you can have the experience and watch it that way, right? Or I also just think like when you think about the big movies like Singing in the Rain or Grease or Sound of Music, the musical surgeons is hardcore coming back to like musical movies, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Even TV shows, right? Because you think about it, they had Boy Meets World turned into Girl Meets World. Then you had the Full House and Fuller House,
Or
Fresh
like
Prince of Bel-Air to Fresh Prince. I mean, they're remaking so many of the shows from.
and
Yeah.
it's I think like I feel excited actually about this pattern because I'm not running scared. Like I don't feel like I know a lot of people, like, so I'm just going to say it. So I'm going to be 50 this year, right? And I have a lot of people in my life who are turning 50 in the generation, and they're nervous because they're like, we're going to get like edged out of whatever, or like, I don't know how to use whatever social media in this capacity, or I don't know how to do reels or whatever it is. Just you name it, right? And to me, I'm like, learn all the things. We should all be learning all the things, but also lean into like the things that you know. Like keep using that as a tool, right? Because we underestimate how exciting it is, right? Like I'm still excited talking about those times and the things I worked on. And when I was sharing it with you guys, I was like, you know what? I've had a hell of a career. Like I forget that part because listen, that was
Mm-hmm.
2001, 2002,
Right.
2003. That's a while ago. You know,
Yeah.
that's almost 20 some odd years ago.
I actually really like one of the things you just mentioned, that is basically lean into what you do know, right? I think that's very powerful because there's like a quote that says when people zig, you zag, right? And basically, if you want to have a competitive edge, you don't do what everyone else is doing. You lean into what you're like, one thing that you're really good at that other people are not good at. That's how you differentiate yourself. And that actually reminds me of a lot of lessons I learned from like business case studies way back when. So the one that reminds me of is the story behind the 5-hour energy shot. I don't know if you know the story, but the whole idea behind 5-hour energy shot was that they were trying to compete with the energy drink business. So like Gatorade, Powerade, all this kind of
Red
stuff.
Bull, all that. Yeah.
And what they realized very quickly is that in order to compete with them, they'd have to do an insane amount of marketing spend. So there's no way to directly compete with them. So then the founders of that company had a brilliant idea. They said, why compete with them directly when I can just get alternate shelf space? So Gatorade and Powerade is typically all bundled together in packages at like the shelves, right? If you look at 5-hour energy shot, where it's sold right at the cash register. And the reason for that is they have no competition in that space, right? It's the same idea. You have quick energy. They're doing it in smaller bottles because then it's a completely different market. People are drinking an entire bottle of Gatorade versus people that just want a couple sips to get that energy boost. At the same time, it's basically targeting to a completely different audience because you're not competing with all the beverage brands that are on shelves. Instead, you're competing in a space where there are no other beverages.
Right.
Now there's refrigerators and stuff, but like for a long time, there was no real competition when you're putting 5-hour energy shots next to a pack of gum.
I don't remember other stuff being there for a while. It's true. Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that there's something to be said for whenever I read, and most people don't believe it. Listen, I'm married to someone who's quite a cynic, and I'm always like, listen, everyone has a lane, because I help a lot of people. That's part of my upbringing. My dad did that a lot. He helped so many people, and it's always like, my husband's not Indian. And so sometimes in his mentality, he's like, how do you have, help us, help the family. Why are you always out there doing this? And I'm like, something? I believe that we can all have a lane and we can all have a thing. And me helping this person is 1,000% not going to take away from what I'm doing, but it can help me grow and amplify and reboot and all of those amazing things. And I believe that, I really do. We all have a skill. We all have a, a certain something. It doesn't have to be super carved out, right? It's like you said, look, I never looked at myself as like a pattern recognition person, but maybe that is my thing. Maybe that's been my thing my whole life. Because, this is a crazy story, but as you were talking to me about that, Getula, I was like, it's interesting. When I was covering the Michael Jackson trial, they had these people, they had jury consultants. And what a jury consultant does is that they get paid a lot of money to come in and read a jury. Basically, you sit there and you tell either the prosecutor or you tell the defense attorney, based on this jury, I can tell you that this person's probably going to say guilty, not guilty, biased, not biased. And that jury consultant is huge. And they were hiring all of these jury consultants. And I met a lot of jury consultants, but one of them in particular, he wanted to hire me actually to become a jury consultant because he was like, you were so good at reading people. Like, I know you would be so good at this. And it's that same idea, right? It's like a pattern. Because after he said that, I was like, really? I don't know if I want to do that. That seems really boring, blah, blah, blah. But honestly, it paid like so much money. I'm like, why didn't I take him up on that? He was like, you can work for me. I'll give you profits. I'm already established. I read this book, and the book actually, it's written by a jury consultant, and it's about how you can read people's faces, like even based on their features. So like people with big ears tend to be more generous than people with small ears. Like it had all of these different like data points, which were so fascinating, but it's the same idea, right? This is the through line. It's patterns, patterns, patterns. And so maybe I'm supposed to do something. Maybe I'm going to be a predictor of some sort. Maybe you're
or a psychic, as you just said.
Yeah. And I think it's pattern recognition, in my opinion, is an absolutely phenomenal skill because it applies to everything, right? It's even, let's take the media industry, right? Being able to see what has happened, and analyze and understand the probability of something else happening. That's really, really beneficial to the person that has that skill set. And I think the other piece of that is also retention of details, right? So that's where I think the detail orientation part can actually play a big role, because if you can remember the statistics you mentioned for like juries, for example, like big ears is more likely to have this, or I don't know what those other features are.
Because I remember looking at my ears, I'm like, do I have big ears? Am I general? That's why I remember certain details are so random. Or it was like, if someone has really big eyes, they are really kind-hearted. So I was like, I'm so kind-hearted because I had big eyes. They've gotten smaller as I'm getting older, but I have really big eyes. And so these are like the little details. I'll find the title of the book. I think you guys will actually enjoy it. I forgot how much I love it, just because it was super random. I'm like, I was reading this very random book because this jury consultant was like, you have to come work. His name is Howard Verinsky. I should contact him one of these days, but he was like so trying to hire me to the point where my husband recently brought it up to somebody like that. He's like, Howard Verinsky kept calling Falguni and saying, oh my God, Falguni, you need to come work with me. And like, I had a job. I was a producer at like at NBC. And I was like, Howard, I'm like a producer. What are you talking about? And he was like, you'd be amazing. He's like, we would build this. He's like, I have $1 million business already. This can go big. He's like, I'll give you shares in it. You can have, so pattern. My next pivot, I'll come on your podcast and talk about this new pivot. I'm going to become a jury.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's a great discussion on the secret superpower. I mean, absolutely amazing to hear that. Yeah. Okay, so just come back to the rapid fire here. Actually, last question in the series. What's a superpower you wish you had? It could be unrealistic as well.
Oh, really? Like it could be like mind reading and stuff like that?
Yeah. If you want it to be.
Although it may not be unrealistic for you. With your
I knew you were going to say that. I'm just kidding. I didn't. I could teleport because I freaking hate LA traffic. Um,
Oh
no,
yeah.
but really, I
Hmm.
would say it would it would be so amazing if I could find a way at times to really to mind read, only because not because I'm dying to know what someone's thinking, but I think it would help build that compassion element of how your words are really impacting that person, because sometimes people don't want to share. And I just think that that ability in the grander scheme of our lives, and it would help people in communication so much more, and I think it would lead to more peaceful interactions. So that would be a very
Wow.
cool, you know,
That's
ability to have. Yeah.
very
Okay.
thoughtful. Very thoughtful of that. Yeah.
And teleport.
Okay, I guess that
I hate driving.
that brings us to the end of rapid fire. I guess before we start to close our discussion here, what's been your biggest accomplishment last 1 or 2 years?
Um, I would say on a professional level this year, I got to speak on a panel for the first ever South Asia House at South by
Oh,
Southwest, and that
wow.
was very cool. The panel was amazing, and it was with Rizwan, and he's an actor, and this other producer, and it was I like any moment where there's such beautiful community building, and I could just tell they were both like, we want to work with you, let's find a way. And I'm like, I don't do scripted, I'm not a comedy writer. And he was like, basically, anyway, it was a whole thing, but that was pretty incredible to see the first South Asia house at South by Southwest, and then to actually be a part of it, and I would say on a personal
Hmm.
level, I think this year, my family and we went on a massive safari trip, and to just be in nature
Oh,
with
that's fun.
these animals. And it's so like my life is never going to be the same, right? Like after that,
Wow. Where was
we
that?
went to South Africa and Botswana, and being
Okay.
sitting there watching elephants eat, and watching a rhino mother and 1 month old baby, and seeing a water buffalo and lions and their cubs, and coming right to your jeep, you just realize how much bigger the world is. Like, I am a little speck, and here are these animals just living their lives, coming near me. I am paying a lot of money to see them. You know what I mean? It really is like something that is mind blowing, and so that was pretty spectacular. And yeah, like I said, life changing. A big part of it too. Not to go too deep into this, but my mom's side of the family is from Kenya, and I never really, I haven't thought about this in a long time, but my grandfather, his leg was eaten by a hippo in Kenya. And
Oh,
so
wow.
yeah, and it was a very big deal at the time, and obviously it is a big deal. He was trying to save someone, and so he jumped into the ravine. And anyway, uh, I'm noticing now, the more I share, I hadn't shared that story a lot with people in my life, and the more I share it, especially people who have, there are a lot of Gujaratis in Kenya, and so when someone hears my mom's maiden name, they're like, "Oh my God!" Everybody knows about it. Everybody knows about my grandfather's leg being eaten by a hippo, which is, there's something ancestral to that, and there was like a pull, and I'm still processing what that is and what I'm supposed to do with that. So yeah.
Got it. Wow. But well, thanks for sharing that
Oh
with
yeah,
us.
thank you.
Um, I guess before we wrap, do you have any recommendations for our listeners? A recommendation could be a piece of media, like a book, movie, podcast, or it could be general advice as well.
Um, I well, I really love. I reread and read the book, The Yamas and the Niyamas, and it's a yoga kind of book, but it has a lot of sutras, and it has a lot of things, and I kind of, I read it in the morning. I find it to be really really grounding, and I think that no matter what you do for a living, no matter where you work, no matter who you are, we could all use a dose of grounding, a to really get to who we are and who we are meant to be here, on this like planet. Because if you don't do that, I think you can get lost in the shuffle of life. So I'm a huge fan of that book. I'm not a yoga teacher, but I do teach meditation to like inner city schools in LA, and I just think we need more of that. I actually believe that meditation can help solve, to a small extent, a lot of our gun violence.
Awesome. Well, Falguni, it was really, really great to speak with you today and learn a little bit about your story. Hopefully, we were able to help inspire you and have you think in different ways that you wouldn't have otherwise. Really hope you enjoyed the conversation. Thank you to all our listeners for tuning in. If you guys are not already following us on Instagram and on YouTube, please be sure to give us a follow. That's at Your Life Unfiltered on YouTube as well as on Instagram. Thank you all for joining and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.